The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
After a 6-month silence, I am ready to launch back into, slowly, step by step, to launch back into my 2024 Orchestration Challenge entries. So a huge apology to everybody. As a lot of you may know, I have been struggling with long COVID symptoms, and I wish I could say that I'm over long COVID or that I'm coming out of long COVID. I think that the best that I can say is that the condition is sort of stabilizing. So I'm able to find a way of working within the, I don't know, disability would be the best way of putting it. So not to dwell on that or anything, let's just see how I can make it through the next 6 entries of these deliciously fun entries from our website subscribers. Starting with Alex's here on this score. Okay, Alex, so you have a bit of a kind of a mix-up between, or a mashup, I would say, between kind of romantic era scoring with your bass tuba here, which is definitely something that would not occur in the classical era, and with like having, I think you intend to have natural horns here, but it's a little confused. See, because you've got a transposing score here. You've got your A clarinets, right, and they've got a key signature of B flat, and they're written, in the transposition of an A clarinet to what it would normally be, right? So this is actually sounding D, right, and down a third from the written note. Okay. But here you've got horns in F, right, with a key signature of G major, as if it were a non-transposing instrument, and yet here you show a unison of horn with your oboe part, right? So it's a little confusing, like that. I don't know why there's a key signature there, but it kind of doesn't belong, right? If you're using natural horns, they don't need a key signature at all. In fact, I would say concert horns today pretty much don't really need a key signature unless you're writing, like, say, band music or say crossover music, say like of a pop chart or something like that. And concert music in general is sort of departing from the need to use key signatures at all. So yeah, so that's one thing to think about. Now another thing too is sort of the kind of like the overall assignment of instruments to pitches, right? So here you're telling me that you have 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, etc., 2 horns, right? But I'm really only seeing one single voice scored at any given time, right? And you're not telling me, well, is this like first clarinet? Is it second clarinet? Is this maybe first clarinet and that's second clarinet? Or maybe this is all first clarinet and then these less important notes maybe are for second clarinet? Just speaking, in terms of economy, the way that you've scored it, you could just have a single flute, a single oboe, one each clarinet and bassoon and horn, right? And even D trumpet, right? You're barely using your D trumpet at all. So like I said, I see a sort of a mix and match, right? You're scoring quite high for horn and F here. And I guess that's an attempt to get around the whole problem of having more pitches that you could use, right, for the like using the natural horns and having a kind of avoiding using too many stop notes and so on. So I think that if you were going to add bass tuba, you don't really need to worry about that, right? So you could have some of this played by trumpet or some instrument that can reach these higher pitches a bit better, right? And I notice here with your with this horn right in here, this horn passage, horn phrase, you jump down, right, rather than going to the impossibly high D above high C, right? Well, I mean, some horn players can play that high, but don't score it unless you're working with a specialist who's who maybe has got one of those corno de tirarsi or whatever. All right, so let's play by the rules here. Does this intro set the mood effectively? Well, here you're starting off with octaves in clarinet and bassoon. I'm just going to pretend that these are not scored a duet. In other words, two instruments playing the same notes and the same pitches, in the same phrase, using just a single voice in the scoring. Right? I'm gonna pretend that these are all intended to be single instruments, just because of the way that that's the most balanced way that this could be approached. Right? Okay. So, this starts off really beautifully. You've got this kind of octave idea here, and then the way that it's scored, you have the two parts, the kind of the two-part writing that's inherent in the chordal passage, sort of being divided across bassoon, and then second violins in the middle, and then clarinet above, and so on. And that has a beautiful sound. It's a little dense, though. Did you notice that it just really has a kind of a it has a really kind of a cloistered sort of a feeling, right? It's not like the most sort of effortless sort of a sound. But I still, I understand where you're coming from. I think with a better sound set than what you're using, it would be a lot clearer, right? and I really like the way that you are like trading off the melody to the first flute here, and then the oboe comes under. But this is really ineffective here. This da 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 ba ba da 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 dum. I feel the way that it's scored with the with such a close proximity, and with this unison with oboe and flute and so on, which, by the way, I feel is completely unnecessary for the oboe. The oboe would be better harmonizing from below, right, rather than adding its weight to the first flute part. But be that as it may, the reason why Beethoven's harmony works so beautifully is that he's got space in his harmony, like just within the playing all tones the same sound kind of an instrument as a piano, right? So I feel it just gets a little too clustered here, and that this lower harmonic part is so low in the bassoon that it doesn't really contribute, right? So it's the stretch is in the wrong place, right in here, I would say, in terms of the harmony. This is kind of interesting here. This I mean, this sort of almost says like, kind of legato articulation. I sort of try to avoid that kind of thing, putting a slur over repeated notes like this. Let's. I think that you can, like, if you're going to score in the style of Beethoven, you can kind of use Beethoven's style. You could just say pianist, piano, legato, get rid of the slur, right? And you'll get exactly the same effect. And then that clears up any confusion that you might have here. Is this intended, like the conductor would look at this and say, geez, is this intended to be a tie, but that's supposed to be intended to be a legato thing? And of course, the players can't see each other's parts, so they can't really refer to them to see whether or not they're getting it right, right? So just really try to avoid this unless it's happening in all parts, right? Now, in terms of bowing here, like you would, you do the same thing here, right? You've got to slur over repeated notes when it would be much better to go down, up, down, up, down, up, right? See, so like this just really messes up the bowing pattern for the player. When, just get rid of this and put the slur right here, and you've got a much more natural kind of a bowing pattern for the player. Okay, so I would say, does the intro set the mood effectively? I would say that the quality of tone here is compelling, but the execution is a little faulty, right? It's just a little kind of the sort of puts a lot of the weight of the harmony in kind of awkward places. Okay. Now, going on, we've got unison between oboe and first violin. And I would say, like, much, much better to have, like, a single oboe here, right? So you get the expression of the players. And here you've scored this, like, mezzo forte on the oboe and piano on the violin. And, you do not need to do that. And here you're going to this screamingly loud fortissimo here. When the players are at forte here, and there's a bit of a jumble in terms of the harmonic weight of the accompaniment of the melody, right? So the end result is that you just really will hear, especially with these horns playing, or this horn playing really, really loudly in its high register. You just don't really get a balanced sound here. And what's more, you start off with this lovely unison, and then you don't take it any further, and then you don't even finish the note of the phrase. Ba nothing, right? Da ta. Doesn't that need to be in the oboe part as well? Right? And wouldn't this be, if some of these lines, if they were doubled by strings, wouldn't you get like a much smoother effect in here? And look, you do not need to, you don't need to mark mezzo forte here. Everybody can be piano, and you can just write solo over here, and then you get the nice effect. And then everybody can be the same dynamics. Maybe crescendo up to forte in the middle here, or mezzo forte. But you certainly don't need to go to fortissimo. That is just a huge, loud sound here. And what's more, just, this is such a high part here for horn if we're talking about transposition, right? So, and we are, because obviously this is a unison, right? So what's going to happen here is there's going to be huge pressure coming from the horn as it pushes up to near its high C, and then as it jumps down to this, you'll suddenly hear like a huge gap in the dynamic strength, right? Well, not a huge gap, a little gap, but still, compared to, maybe that's why you're compensating with this fortissimo here, right? But it's just a little irregular, all right? Now here, like looking at this accompaniment here, there's zero reason for you to go back and forth, pizzicato divisi. I don't know why, because like I'm a violist, I could play all the notes of here just much more regularly if, I'm just going pluck, 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 pluck. That's no big deal. That's what the violas are for, right? So it's a situation where the player who's playing the offbeat is always going to be worrying about whether they're really, really coming in the offbeat all the time. Now, of course, a really great player doesn't really have that much of a concern, but it's still kind of like extra. It's just like extra stuff to hassle with, like the way that you scored this divisi. Why not just have everybody play that all together? And you could even do tricks like you could have half pizzicato divisi and half staccato arco, right? And then you get a really beautiful incisive sound here. I will say that with like the way that you're scoring, it's really strange. Why doesn't the bass tuba have a key signature? Okay, but the way that you're scoring this, you're putting a huge amount of weight here, just even by having this bass tuba part in here. I just don't know why you really need that bass tuba. I mean, perhaps you're just thinking, oh, well, I want to stabilize what's going on down there. It's stable enough. This really departs from the whole classical feel, as does the kind of screamingly high horn right here. I think that like if you really want that classical era feeling, it's better to use the strings than it is to just pop in the horn there, right? Like it almost sounds like a wind band piece with a few little strings in the background, right? Rather than an integrated symphonic exercise. And the other thing is like you have like kind of when we get to this next part here, where we're the first concern that I had here was, does it contrast with the theme, right? Or is there contrast between lines? There is contrast between lines, but it's really strange. It's like here you're going oboe, dum, and like, and then you just throw in bassoon way below, and then you have this bum, and then dum, and then dum, bum 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 bum. It's just very uneven, right? I think just simplifying the hell out of this would make it much more effective, right? I mean, I see where you're going for here. You want that kind of that sort of blend of like viola and clarinet and bassoon here and so on. But the thing is like that, when all is said and done, like it's what is Beethoven saying in the piano music? He's saying ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, right? So this is really great, having the oboe play, right? The only problem here is, of course, with this blasting kind of melody that was already expressed in the oboe. You're just kind of, now there's just more oboe, right? So there's no contrast between what happened before, right? See, if you had sort of wallpapered this with some strings, doubling on some of this, like, and there was a natural transition to the octaves that are in the piano part, which there don't seem to be here, then I mean, there is one beautiful idea here. Like, if we were just to kind of correct some of the faulty registers and everything else, I really like the idea of the triple octave here in oboe, horn, and bassoon. That's really cool. All right. But like, in terms of just suddenly going from there to here, you put so much weight on the oboe here that, I mean, if there were strings here, like I was saying before, then the solo oboe suddenly standing out all on its own would be great. And it doesn't need any help from the bassoons, right? Da, and then just clarinet, boo, 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 right? It's sort of strange. There are missing slurs here and there. I'm just assuming you forgot to put in slurs. The other thing that I would say too is, like, don't just naturally assume that this should be like one long slur, or even that it should be slurred at all. You could be doing pizzicato, ta 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 ta, leggermente, right? Rather than he's not saying legatissimo, right? He's saying as dexterously as or possible, as sort of kind of fluent in a very active and agile way, right? So maybe you get that more with separated notes than you do with slurred notes. All right, now here we've got the, do we have an emphatic color of line? That was like my main concern here. And I really love the way that you go to octaves here between the viola and the first violin rather than the seconds, right? Because that gives you the low C sharp here and, all the notes below G and so on, right? And so you don't have to worry about it. But that doesn't mean that there couldn't have been any inner voices right in here, right? In between the octaves. I mean, does the harmonic density set up what's to follow? It kind of doesn't, right? There could have been, like I was saying, like there could have been some inner voices here. There could have been a little bit of you could have seen some pushing here from horns and trumpets, so that it really sets up this right in here. Now, like, once again, we just have this problem of dynamics in phrases, right? So forte, piano, piano to mezzo forte, mezzo forte, crescendo to forte here and mezzo forte there. Why? I mean, why did these have to be two different dynamic levels? And then, like, here you just sort of set the knob at mezzo forte here and forte there, and then everybody's playing forte throughout these passages when your winds are trying to be kind of nice and nimble, right? And we don't even have a marking here for the clarinet to show what their dynamic should be here, right? What was the last thing that they did? Mezzo forte. So that's what they'll do here, right? If you don't give them any warning, right? And, it just doesn't balance with the rest of the colors that you've got here. So, shouldn't everybody be going crescendo from piano to forte? Shouldn't this all be like piano? Just because you're expressing a main idea, a melody or like an important part, it does not mean that it has to be forte, right? Players know how to balance within, like you could tell everybody to be, everybody to be soft here with a little bit of a crescendo here in the middle between these two bars. And then this could go back to being piano or mezzo piano or whatever. And you still would beautifully, if you just add the colors together and the strength of the registers together, that does all the work for you. You don't need to overdo it with the dynamic markings. Then, the main reason I'm underlining this is like when you get to here and you just assume everybody who has set, this was marked piano, and then here you have a part going crescendo to forte, and it's still piano as far as the violinist knows. And then here you've got forte in the first violins. It's still piano as far as the second violinist knows. And then mezzo forte in the violas, and then forte in the cellos. Do you see the problem here? Mezzo forte is left over from the double basses. Shouldn't everybody be playing the same thing? If you're going to push into a forte, shouldn't they all be pushing together? Or shouldn't they all just be playing forte together? Bum, bum, bum. Then here you have this wonderful idea of like dropping down to piano. Shouldn't everybody go piano? Bum, bum. And then crescendo again, everybody. Dun, dun, dun. Now, why does this have to be loud with accents? Dun, dun. Right? Why can't we have back and forth dynamics, right? Bum, bum, bum. Dun, dun, da, 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 bum, bum. So think about those things. I won't go into this too much, except to say that in a lot of ways, there are still some balance problems. I think you should try to have more homogeneity here in, adding winds and strings together in different configurations. Rather than having the parts be so sort of separated in color and function, right? I really appreciate how you're trying to bring this this horn part out, but be aware that the horn is just going to completely wipe out anything you're trying to do here with your flutes, right? You're adding the strongest member of this group, of this entire orchestra, minus the trumpets. The strongest member of this group is playing piano to forte on some of its higher notes, right? Whereas here you've got the flutes playing these low notes, which it has very little facility with in terms of dynamic pressure, right? So there's a lot of imbalance in this, but too much to go over with, Alex. I think that maybe just make sure you watch like all of these compilation videos. And I think you'll pick up some tips on, how some good ways to fix this. But aside from that, I'm just going to say that, this was just really a great way to start this particular compilation of 6 scores. And it's making me really excited to look at the next few. So thanks very much for giving me a nice kick here of inspiration to teach and coach and share my information that I can with you to perhaps help you on your way to becoming, a more experienced orchestrator. Thanks so much. All right, Danielle. I'm so happy that you were able to get me the revision of the images of your score in time for this evaluation. Yeah. So yeah, there were a couple issues with the PDF, and I didn't catch them when I first processed these entries, and I was able to get Danielle to send me new PDFs. And what you see is my I also did a little bit of manipulating the images here to make them more suitable to a widescreen format. So anyhow, let's really play by the rules here, as I've been trying to do for these evaluations throughout, and really, try to stick to the criteria, right? So, first one being, does the intro set the mood effectively? And I feel that it's really, really nice. I mean, you've got this beautiful flute singing over the top here, and a really nice, solid reinterpretation or transcription, I should say, of the material onto the strings. So here, just I would advise you, even though there is nothing but an eighth note in the right hand of the original piano part, Beethoven, if you listen to like the way the piano players play it, I mean, this is why I really, really want my participants to really, really listen to what pianists do, including what pitches they sustain, right? So in the original, or excuse me, in the recording that I recommended, in pretty much every recording I've ever heard, the pianist sustains this little F that is at the bottom of their right hand all the way through to the very, very end of the fermata, right? So it's kind of scored incorrectly in the original, right? It would have been better to score that as like a quarter note rather than as an eighth note, because what the eighth note ended up having you do, just by its very suggestion, was to not only shorten it so that the bottom drops out from under this beautiful sustained fermata, right? It just suddenly it's cold. It was left out there in the cold. Not only is that gone, but you've gone ahead and shortened the quarter note with the fermata below into just an eighth note as well, right? So that's not, I just feel stylistically that doesn't quite work with what Beethoven intended there. I think it would have been better for all of these pitches to be the duration of a quarter note with a fermata over it, right? I really like the way that you take this little breath here so that the players can sort of, reorganize and then just go straight into this. Yeah, I mean, I kind of prefer putting the bar line here, just the way that Beethoven organized it, and treating this as a pickup bar. It's so much better. But that's not always possible for the different notation software and also skill level of different participants and so on with their, how to format these things. So it's totally fine, Danielle. Don't worry about this right in here being different from the original score. You notice, though, that it's really slow right in here, right? Because it's still at larghissimo. Yeah, you had a little problem with the tempo marking, the actual metronome marking colliding with your text. So I fixed that for you and just put in some new text for you and so on that is more compatible with what you added here. So like here you could have added, what Beethoven wanted in his original, is what, like going to an allegro or something like that. But it's all right. Okay. But just I would say it probably would be better just to move this time change to like right over the beat, da 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 da, right, rather than da 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 da, right? Okay, but the main concern here, intro setting mood effectively, I think it works beautifully. Now, just to talk about the orchestration, while it's pretty solid for the strings, you have to go check out my tip, which is on. It's I can't remember if I guess I didn't make a video of it, but I did release it as a text tip on the main website orchestrationonline.com, where I talk about the case of the disappearing flute, right? And that is that in classical orchestras like this, the flute on top, playing at an octave above, would be added to just sweeten the pitches below, right? So the flute would disappear into the violin, right? It would just sort of softly, have this beautiful kind of resonance above, but you wouldn't really hear it for its own sake unless you were really listening hard, right? So, the other problem here is that you're not telling me which flute player, right? You've taken the time to set this up beautifully. Flute 1 and 2, oboe 1 and 2, and so on and so forth. But at no point in any of these bars do I see which player is intended where. I'm assuming this is first player, right? This should be the first, right? So you would have to tell me number 1, period, right? Now, if you intended both players to be playing at the same time, you would write the letter A and then the number 2, A2, or A2, as it would be pronounced or spoken of translated as in Italian, A2, right? So here I would say you just really need one flute, and it would just be a subjective thing whether or not you wanted it to play out over over the strings. So if you could mark it up like to mezzo piano or mezzo forte or something like that, but that's maybe a little too soloistic, right? I'm not so sure about this, jumping down an octave, right? I think it's much better up there, ya-da-da-da-dum, just kind of singing above everything else. I think if you've started it here, you might as well just leave it up there, right? I just, when you drop down here, it makes me assume that you don't really want this to be heard, right? So that's what the conductor would be thinking. Like the conductor might be thinking, well, he sort of wants that classical thing, flute disappears, and then there's supporting in there. Okay, I get it. So they won't question you; they'll just play it, but you won't hear any flute, right? Right. So that's the trade-off. And you've set that same thing up here, right, with the flute an octave above the strings. And we'll get to this. But like here, at least you've got the oboe doubling. I mean, one of them, how many oboes? How many bassoons? Right? A duet here, or 1 or 2 or what? Right? Which one, if it's not both? You have to tell me. If it's a second bassoon, you write in 2, period. Right? Okay. And then here, like, you have divided up the pitches to, so it's first and second voice. And the same thing is true in your brass that share pitches. All right. Well, okay. I'm not going to be too picky about it. Let's go into the next particular section. All right. And you're going to hear a little bit of noise as I'm reorganizing my desk here. I always start these evaluations after I've had a pause, kind of forgetting to set up my my screens on my desk. So here, all right, I'm putting my other screen where I can see it. Hopefully it won't fall off of my desk. Okay. All right, so now let's talk about the next section. Does the melody start with elegance? Yes, it does. I'll have a little bit of a comment here for you about like bowing in particular. We'll break down all the bowing here for you in a second. But I think that this is a really beautiful idea. It's just to really keep it in strings. It has a real, sort of mid-classical feel to it, the way that you've got it. Is there a natural flow to the accompaniment? Yes, there is. But I think that you sort of, there are some pitches missing in here that would help you maintain the feeling of that sort of suspension of the, the kind of like the F continuing through all the time, right? Like you cut it out here, and you cut out like the lower Fs of the cello pattern, right? So I mean that's all fine, but you could have supplied that with like maybe octaves in your double basses, divisi octaves in your double basses, so you don't lose that lower note, right? In this particular section, pitch area of the accompaniment. All right. So let's talk bowings. All right. You have just left in the phrase marks over the strings. That's not bowings. That's not useful to the players. Now you might say, oh well, but I read somewhere that the players prefer just to see the phrase markings. That's not exactly true. What they will say is it's okay to just leave the phrase markings, and that is if and only if, I would say, your concertmaster has the time to go over the parts and divide up where the slurs should go for their own bowing, right? So if they have the time to do that, then great. But, your piece, let's say that you submitted this to an orchestra and you really wanted to hear it, and they said, we have a little bit of time at the beginning of next rehearsal. We'll take a look at it. Let's assume like maybe a student orchestra or something like that, where there isn't a lot of time pressure and money pressure. So let's say that they take a look at this. Well, look, the players are not going to have time to go over the bowings, and you have just they'll just like go back and forth with their bows, and it's not going to sound that great. So how would I bow what you've written here? We got a nice down bow at the beginning. Now here we could slur, right? So down, up, slurring the dotted rhythm. Then here, down, and then slur to the second beat, right? So it's down to beat 2.5, or 1.5, excuse me, or beat to the beginning of beat 2. And then a 2.5, that would be up bow, right? And then here, like instead of this whole thing being slurred, I just say down bow, up bow, right? You wouldn't be marking the up bow and down bow markings. I'm just saying where the slurs go to enable the players to play up bow and down bow. Do not put up bow and down bow markings in your score. That is the player's job and the librarian's job, okay? They're the ones that take care of that. All right, so down bow, down bow, slurring to here, up bow on this beat, down bow, up bow, and then just everybody would just hold a fermata here, and the first violin would go down, up, and then here they would just recover, and then I would say slur this, da, and then here da, down, up, right? So in other words, slur, and then you don't have to worry about slurs here because this will be a down bow, that'll be up bow. And then here you could just go down, so slur this, and then up, right? So that's really, really simple. That's a really simple approach. And of course, you don't have to worry about slurs so much for your pizzicato parts, but you would want the strings that continue to bow to have slurs as well. So this would be slurred, and then that would be slurred, right? Now here you're saying violin and violin. Which one is which, right? It's even though it's pretty obvious that this is first and that's second, you really do want to say first, or violin 1, violin 2, or first violin, second violin, right? Or you could even just have something like this with the name in the middle, right? Violins, and then you could have like the way that you have numbers here, Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2. Okay? All right, so is there a natural flow to this? I would say it works really nicely, except for that little thing that I talked about, like how you're leaving out these bottom notes. And I understand that's so that like the pizzicato patterns are really easy for your cellists. All right? That's fine, but like don't leave out this bottom part right in here, right? And then, so that whenever the low F comes in the left hand of the original score, write it in, right? And then right here at the end, by leaving out those low Fs, F, 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 it just really sounds kind of dull here at the end. You don't have that beautiful sense of suspension, right? You have to have the low Fs agreeing with these higher Fs, right? And once again, I would say this divisi octaves, right? So just change this into F octaves and then continue to go F, F, F here on the last, or on these 3 beats here, first 3 beats of this bar. Then I would say you've got your natural transition to octaves, you're expanding without clogging up, and it would sound really, really great. So those would be, that's how I would fix this, right? I think otherwise it's a really great approach, Danielle. It's really nice. Now here we get to the leggermente section, right? And you really should write in leggermente here and here, right? Because that's, Beethoven intends this to be played in that style, right? So you want it to be light, quick, and dexterous, right? So with almost like an easy virtuosity. Imagine Mozart, right? Just that kind of thing. So you should write in leggermente, okay? And you should give us a dynamic. What's the dynamic here? What's the dynamic for these violas and cellos, right? Wouldn't they get the crescendo as well? But what's the dynamic here? Would it be piano, mezzo piano? What would it be? You do contrast with the theme really nicely because this is all strings, right? And so here you come in with winds, and so there's a beautiful contrast, and you have a contrast between the lines. But I need to know, like your copyist and your conductor and your score reader need to know who this is. Is this a first oboe, second oboe, both oboes, first or second bassoon? I would say all you need here is just your first oboe and your first bassoon. You don't need to go like firsts and then seconds. So just make it all firsts, right? Because that's their job. It's their jobs. The first player of each pair of or trio of wind players is the person who handles all the kind of tricky stuff, right? So ta 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 ta, and it doesn't need to be slurred or anything. It's all fine. Ta 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 ta. All right, that's all great. Now, so I have no problem with this, just as long as you tell us who it is, who's playing, and how loud they're playing. All right. So otherwise, fantastic job here. Now here, what does Beethoven say? He's like, you have this big slur. Yeah. Well, obviously this is too long to be played under one bow, especially a crescendo. But I mean, crescendo to what? Right? How loud is this? It sounds like in your mock-up that you're intending to go up to, like, say, mezzo forte or forte, right? So let's just assume crescendo to forte from piano, right? So I would say mark the dynamic again. You're starting from a piano, right? And if this is already marked piano, then you can just leave that alone. But when this clarinet and flute come in, they also need to be marked piano, right? And you need to tell us how many flutes are playing this, right? Who's playing here, right? And why have you not included the flutes here? Why can't they go ba da 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 da? And why is the oboe jumping up? I don't get it. Da 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 ba da 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 da. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, maybe you're afraid of sending your oboe too low or something. I don't know if you even need oboe in there. I mean, you could have this played by the clarinet, and you could have also this little triplet an octave higher played by flute. But I don't think you need all 3 groups, right? I think you might get a much more solid sound here. Especially since you don't have the strings to interfere with the flutes right in here. I think you get a much more solid sound if it's just flutes above and just clarinets below. Right? And then you get that wonderfully solid sound of the clarinets mixing with the strings here. But why do we have this whole thing here with the second violin starting a beat late and then the viola starting a beat later than that? I mean, I don't get it. And why do they not have crescendo marked? And why do these not have crescendo marked? And why is there no slur here, right? Let's talk about bowing. All right, so here with the winds, whatever you would decide to do with the winds, I would say you could just slur everything, right? So they can go ba, right? So all under one slur, just like it is, like this nice long slur is here. However, for the strings, you need to make your decision. Do you want separately articulated bow strokes? Do you want it to be up, down, 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 up, right? Do you want it like that? I would start on an up bow here so that this can be a down, right? If you were going to do separate bow strokes. Not that you would write in the bow mark. You do not write in the bow markings. You just give them however it's written out so that they work it out, all right? So I would say if you're going to have this bowed, then, slurred, then I would say this would be slurred, right? Because that'll be their up bow entrance. So da, and then I would just say do this all under one bow, and then do this under one bow. So ta ta. Now here, we'll talk about this in a minute. All right. So I would just say, look, just have everybody just play along. Your viola can play a high F there. That's no problem. You can just have them all go. Have this beautiful, nice, smooth unison with the clarinets. Now, if you feel like, I just want to gradually introduce these players so that it all just kind of just gradually gets louder and thicker, that's okay, but you still have to mark the dynamics correctly here so that they'll all come in and work together. And and you need to mark what the destination dynamic is, right? How loud are people getting? In your mock-up, it's clear you want to go up to mezzo forte or forte, right? Now, there's a concern right in here, I think you've got the emphatic color of line thing down, but there's a concern here about harmonic density setting up what's following. And I think that, with all respect here, if you're going to have your brass come in here nice and big and bright, I think that they could have come in under this, at say maybe piano or pianissimo, and then push forward on a crescendo, taking some of the harmonic spots that they end up what is the resolution of the chord going to here, right? Now, one last little thing here is something I know you were thinking that you were doing something right here by making this a B natural. That's actually wrong. B natural in the melodic line, going to B flat on the fourth beat, right? So da 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 da, B natural, B flat, as it goes da da da. So this has to be right here. This has to be there has to be a major second difference, right, between the B flat and the C, right? Because otherwise the leading tone doesn't work going up to the F. It does it's almost modal, right? It's almost like it's almost like we're coming, we're coming from a different place, right? So when you put the B natural right in there, it almost feels like we're coming off of Lydian, right? Rather than just being in a plain old major scale of F. So this has got to be a B flat, right? So I would say that if you go over this again and try to maybe take some of my advice and see where you get with it, I would say bring in the brass here on some of these harmonic positions and also filling in some other pitches that that lead naturally forwards to some of these other things. I say probably more trombones and natural pitches in your horns, right? If you are intending to be more natural here with your horns. Okay, so sorry, it's playing with my head a little bit. So let's assume that you do all of that, right? Then you have to decide on this bar whether or not you want to follow Beethoven's idea of slurs, right? Which is just phrasing for him, right? He's just saying, connect these chords. But he doesn't necessarily mean for you to go da-da, as if you were playing it on strings, right? You might want each of these to be played with separate bows, dun dun dun, which I think fits the forte character, right? And especially since you haven't marked that in any of your other parts, right? How about if everybody just separately articulates it, bum bum bum? Then you don't need these slurs at all, right? And then this makes much more sense. Extra soft, extra soft. But right in here, do you want it to keep going extra soft throughout the, maybe do you want bright and then dark and then bright and then dark, right? That's much more Beethoven, right? So after you play these really soft notes, dun, dun, and then come back to forte. Dun, 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 no slurs. Dun, dun. Now, as to the orchestration of this, it's pretty solid unisons and so on. The only thing that I would say is like maybe what you could have done here that would make much more sense with a much wider, more orchestral kind of a sound is you could have had your violins come in an octave higher, right? And that way, like doubled on these first three notes, an octave higher with the flutes, as I've been suggesting. So the flutes are doubling the first violins. Then you have your second violins coming in, once again on the upbeat, as I have suggested, F, E, D, and so on to the C. And then that, of course, could be doubling with clarinet or oboe or whatever you decide to do here. Okay, then you have this much broader sound, and then way up high you've got that F, G, A, right, which would be doubling the top pitches here of the flutes and oboes. So, and then I would say just like try to find like more more harmonized pitches, right? Like for instance, you have completely left the C out, right? Like that, that turns us into a C triad, right? And then this is like this, the C ender here, this becomes like an F 6/4 chord, right? So like you just really have taken the top two pitches of the harmony rather than having any of these be subordinate parts to one another so that you could get a nice full chord, right? So if you have the strings and octaves going bum, 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 then you can have first flute doubling the top violin part, and then you can have like second flute and oboe taking those middle pitches as you see them in the piano part, like first C and F, then C and E, then C and F again, right? And then you can have your second oboe doubling the lower violins as I've expressed, and then whatever, like this is actually like some of this harmonization that you have in here could be just given to just make sure that it's in your brass and your and some of your middle winds, right? And then you just get a much brighter, stronger chord. And I like the way that you back off here. So, and then just do the same thing that I suggested here in this bar, right? But then maybe leave these alone with just a much lighter sound. Then I'd say that this is much more organized and has a clearer and brighter kind of a thing. And then you get the most out of, where this is pushing, okay? So those are just some suggestions. I know I'm going to huge detail here, but I think it's worth it. I think you are really developing as an orchestrator, and, even though I'm not going to have another orchestration challenge this year. I'm just sort of finishing up the entries from last year because I got sick. I do want to come back to my orchestration challenges, say next year. Maybe have a 2025 one if my health has gotten better. And and I would really love to see your take on the music that I have planned for that, because it's simpler in some ways and much more complex in others, right? So anyhow, with that, just thanks a lot, Danielle, for your entry. And now let's take a look at the next one. Another very cool classical influenced score. not necessarily strictly classical in terms of things like natural horns. You've got some things that could be played on natural horns if you're just willing to deal with like stopped and half stopped notes, like this F and this A. Not the most satisfying pitches, but like in other places, you sort of try to stick to the program. You've got a lot of fives and ones and so on. But I just really have to say like this would be just much better on a modern horn, the way that it's scored. And then here you sort of extend things. I'm not going to bother with this too much because it's an extension of the original material. So let's I'll leave that to you to work out how to fix. But yeah, you say horns in F1 and 2, 3 and 4. Yeah, like you probably could just say horns in F in the middle, and then just have, and then you don't even need to mention, like if it's the standard outlay, then you don't need to mention that it's 1 and 2 on top and 3 and 4 on the bottom. That's just taken for granted, right? So here you start off with a very kind of Mozart Grand Partita kind of beginning, right? Just you sort of have this drone below from your bassoons, and I must say that like the no insult to your sound set, but it really sounds very grunty, like a couple of bassoons playing octaves at piano in a classical kind of a sound would take an effort to sound very beautiful and smooth, right, rather than just kind of like almost like turning on a bagpipe, right? So it's just needs a little bit of work. I'd say maybe if you're trying to make mock-ups and so on of stuff like this, maybe try to get something a little bit more sophisticated. I think Note Performer, for instance, would probably work better. Now you're going to tell me I did use Note Performer. Anyway, yeah, it just feels a little too grindy there. But I mean, like with the right instruments, I think it's fine. There's no need for this first note here to be pianissimo. In fact, you're not going to get a pianissimo. You're going to get at best piano on this low C, because it's a bit of a challenge for a professional player, even just to kind of control that note and not get it to be too loud, right? So I see what you're trying to do here. Like, oh, we'll get it a little softer. Why not just leave it out? Just have the oboe come in here, da 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 da, right? Because you've already got that note, in your B flat clarinet, right? So yeah, so you don't really need to. I mean, you kind of made everything difficult by having this in F, right? Because like if you had it in G, it would be really easy for the oboist to get a nice soft piano D and so on. So you kind of pull the rug out from under yourself by transposing it down instead of up. But that's all right. Now here, the mock-up did something really strange. It almost like added a beat, going da 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 dum. And I have to say here that like I really do prefer the original da 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 dum. In 32nd notes rather than 16th notes. It's just more true to Beethoven, right? So, if you could even just write it out, ba da 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 dum. So maybe just like, best way to express it would be like, if you're going to just completely write it out, or play it in your DAW, I would say eighth followed by 4 32nd notes, right? Da 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 da, rather than da 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 da. It just really drags, like when this is so slow and when this is so slow, it really just feels like it drags down the momentum, right? Like even though this is beautiful and soft and smooth and everything else, I think that you need to respect like the kind of classical era feel of it, right? The just kind of like tossing off little notes here and there, whoop whoop, then you maintain this kind of classical era consistency. That's kind of interesting. There's also a bit of blockiness here in terms of like the lack of any sort of slurring, right? So you could have maybe slurred from here to there, maybe slurred from here to there, right? With this, maybe this G could be like tenuto, like a portato between the two slurs, or it could be just like a held note because like this is the melodic motion, right? Is in the sixths the around the central note, right? Yeah, and then of course you want to slur it, ba da da da, right? Rather than just I mean, here you're very careful about your slurs, so I'm kind of going into a little bit of more effort here to make sure that you are scoring it out in a more natural way for the player. Okay, so it's like all reeds, so it's very extremely reedy. It's going to be, I mean, almost Russian in the way that this is expressed, or you know, to be completely fair about this historically, very much like those little Viennese bands that Beethoven loved so much, right? Of course, you'd need to add horns, right, to really get the sound that Beethoven would go to these little. He had this one favorite little cafe right at the edge of Vienna, and he would go and listen to these folk musicians play on on whatever they could get their hands on: clarinets, oboes, bassoons, horns, and so on. This is the usual kind of thing. Maybe the occasional flute player. And those approaches that they used would make it into a symphonies, right? So whenever you see, like, in the middle of a scherzo, everything's really, really serious, and all of a sudden it turns into this almost sort of comical, like, real scherzo, rather than the symphonic, serious scherzo, to the actual name, actual meaning of the name scherzo, sort of like a joke, right? And you sort of hear this kind of joking, fun, frolicking in a kind of a village style. That's right out of those. Little tavern that he used to go to, right? So if this is emulating that, just maybe kind of go back and listen to some of those moments in his symphonies, and then maybe come back to this, or to what other kinds of stuff that you're going to do in this style. All right. So I see that you sort of really kind of compromised in terms, like, in order to make this into 16th notes, you had to sort of add a beat and everything else, and then that leaves us with a pickup going into common time, right? So it's like 3 beats rather than 2. Anyway, I don't know. I like the original better, but if that feels good to you, then all right. All right. Now, keep in mind here, you've already made a statement on oboe. Do you want to make another statement on oboe? Right? I mean, is that the intention here? Like, is it all about the oboe? Is this a big oboe solo? All right. If we say, does the melody start with elegance? I'd say that's a very elegant beginning. I don't know if you need to do this kind of dynamic mixing. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, why can't everybody just be piano and then everybody find their level, right? The player's going to know that they're carrying the melody here, and you don't even have to mention that this is a solo, right? This is within the context of this kind of playing. Everybody's going to just know from the minute they start playing where their part is in the music. So you just do not need to do so much of this stuff. Why not everybody just be piano, right? With dolce, right? What does Beethoven say at the beginning of this melody? Piano dolce. Sorry, come on. Just put those details in. Don't leave them out. Here you go. Ta, 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 ta. And then you add the sort of ta, ta. All right. You know what? Why slur across the... like you're robbing your downbeats of... just because there's a slur in the piano thing across the phrasing over the bar doesn't mean that you need to slur, like, in the breath between the two notes, right? And this is really weird, the way that you've got this, like... All right, so this first voice dynamic needs to go up here rather than down here, because it's confusing with the second voice, right? So you have the second voice dynamic scored here with this diminuendo to pianissimo. Why? I mean, why did just put a diminuendo? The player will naturally take the note down to a soft kind of a thing. It doesn't even need to be, some people just like are so worried about that they'll mark a niente or like a little circle at the end, like a niente diminuendo. You don't need that. The player naturally shapes the note to die off, right? So just go diminuendo, just get rid of the pianissimo or triple pianissimo. All right. Ba-da-da-da-da-dum. Yeah. Bum bum. This is a kind of a slightly problematic unison here. You'll tend to get like a kind of a slightly fuzzy sound here. You're taking the clarinet in its throat tones and doing a match with the oboe in this very sort of strong, luscious register. Right? It's just not the most pleasant sound. Yeah, and I think you could have done something to like maybe rather than doubling here. What if you had your first clarinet playing the C's and you had your second clarinet doubling these pitches here, this A, B flat, A, right? Because that is as much part of the sound picture, right? And then this G here in the clarinet rather than in the second oboe, right? Where why does that need to be there? Because you're filling in the sound picture in a way that Beethoven didn't, right? He had this nice open chord where you could really feel the tension between the E below and the B flat above in the original chord, right? I think that sometimes those spaces are really important in the voicings of some of Beethoven's chords in order to get the natural feel. So this is all fine, the scoring and the strings. It's all nice. So ba-da, ba-da. Yeah, I'm just not so sure about this sort of limping ta 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 across. Like there's Beethoven's downbeats need strength to them, right? Ta ta ta, right, rather than ta ta ta. It's just that's all just very fiddly. It's like ba ba ba. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like it doesn't have that sort of natural feeling of opening out, right? The player just gets, the player's focus will be on the articulation of the grouping of the legato more than they'll be on the opening out of the sound and the color, right? So it's better just to throw a nice big legato slur over this and just let the players open out. But as far as like natural transition to octaves, I think that you kind of caught that really well, right? So melody starting with elegance, natural transition to octaves, yes. Natural flow in the in your accompaniment, yes. Expanding without clogging up, yes, except for just that caveat that like the top notes of the cellos here could have easily been the other voice in the clarinet rather than so much doubling. And then you sort of like you drop out here with your clarinets when you could have added inner voices that would have kind of kept the consistency of the dynamic and the color of the accompaniment in check, I would say. Right, and then ba-da-da-dum. So this is great, right? So we're going to the next thing. Contrast with theme, yes, because we're going to flutes, right? Contrast between lines, yes, going flute to clarinet, right? And then oboe comes in again. All right, so just a little question. You heard me pose this to Alex a couple evaluations ago at the beginning of this video. Leggermente, does that need to be slurred? Couldn't it be staccato or just even separated notes? Da 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 dum. Doesn't that seem more leggermente than da dum da dum? That sounds more like legatissimo, right? Rather than leggermente, which is sort of a sprightly kind of a thing. Now here you go. Bum. I think this would be. Yeah, I see what you're trying to do here. You're trying to say, it's kind of tough to just jump down to that next note. Not for a clarinet player. Don't worry about it. It is way better for a single player to manage this, right? And in fact, what if you did this? Slur, slur, and then the clarinet responding in staccato, da-da-da-da-da, and then maybe a tenuto at the end. So all one player here, not 1 to 2. Ta 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 ta. Right, so that just has a nice contrast too with the energy, right? All right, and then here you've got some horn notes here and so on. And yeah, you're trying to play by the rules now, right? So this D is, I think, stopped or half stopped, right? So it's not the greatest note. See, if you'd had a contrast, horns in G, then this could be supplied as like one of the root tones of the, this is a sounding G, right? So this could be supplied as the root of the G, and same thing here with this. Or if it was horn in C, probably even better, because that gives you more available notes. Then this sounding G could be like the fifth, right, of the C basso, right? Would give you that note really easily. So yeah, so just don't always think that you have to have, like in this kind of natural horn scoring, you don't always have to have like the same tuning for both groups. In fact, you don't want it, right? If you want more of a variety of sounds. All right, so this all comes to, expanding without clogging up, dying out, the end of the octaves and so on. And then we talked about this, the contrast right in here, like the pizzicato below. That's all great, right? Here's where I would do a little bit of dynamic mixing, like the pianissimo here would be better, right? To just really keep the horn backed off. You do not need to go mezzo piano here. Everybody piano, right? You're putting in mezzo piano perhaps because your sound set is pizzicato sounds really wimpy, right? But everybody will find their balance in here. Just mark everybody piano, except I would say here, have the horn be pianissimo. Okay, and then here, our concern is emphatic color of line. Da 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 bum bum. So this is really beautiful what you did here. Like, you're pushing all the way down to this low B, right? A good player, say first concertmaster, this is going to work out. And then with having the flute come in here at the octave on the G, you are sort of giving, this sound is going to be absorbed into the sound of the oboe to a degree, and then it's going to come out of it, sort of like the illusion is going to come forwards of this being the high note right in here, right? So that's beautifully done. And here you have the second playing above and the first below. You could just do this. I would actually do this as like as two separate voices, right? But still, yeah, mark the the second on top and the first below, right? And then like if you want to swap back, right? Then you would mark it there. But if you don't, then just keep the same separate voices, and that helps the copyist and the conductor, right? And this is really nice. Like I feel this is nice, strong, punchy kind of scoring. I feel a little bit like I don't know why there's like no strings at the beginning, right? You got this dun dun dun, right? Bum bum, and then here you have strings all the way. So it just really, like the one weakness that you've got here is like you're sort of putting the left hand part onto your horns here, but you're not doing anything that, in terms of your harmonic density, that sets up the accompaniment through here, right? So, I love the way that you sort of hold off till this boom right there. I think that's really effective. And I think here you could have just gone C, right? Instead of this bum, 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 right? You could just end it on the C. Because your basses are doing all the work. But, in terms of like, the support, this just really feels all very sudden. Like with the strings coming in there, like on beats 2 and 3, that it doesn't feel very natural. It just feels very kind of blocky. Whereas if you had started here with more strings, and insinuated them into the texture, I'm sorry, I know this is your darling, right? Like what you did here. This was this great idea that you had, and it works on its own, but in terms of the continuity of the piece, it kind of doesn't, I would say, if like we're talking classical scoring, right? So in order to come up with this, I'd say, in order to support this mixed string and wind texture, I would say start here with the harmonic density built into the music, right? It doesn't need to be, like the pitches can get in the way and even collide a little bit with what's going on in the flute and the oboe, just so long as they're kept back a little bit. And then everybody pushes forwards into a forte, and then you just get this really strong 3 notes, right? But the way that it's scored, you're going to go dun, 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 the way that the strings come in, right? And especially with the timpani note at fortissimo, right? This does not need to be fortissimo. Just mark it forte. Just try to have, as much as you can, score to the register of the instrument of the same dynamic, right? See, and here's a place where, like in this register, this balances really well. You don't need to mark the horns down, right? But you've got all these horns, and they could have been adding a lot of color in here and a lot of push in terms of the harmony and so on. And then, like, you just on this last one, yeah, just kind of continuation. You might want to think of, like any contrast. Do you really just want it to be bum, 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 just hard hitting all the way through? Or, what if you went dun, 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 bum, bum, dun, dun, dun? That feels more Beethoven to me, right? And you'll even hear, like, pianists finding some, like, some variation of articulation and so on. Like, they'll really go legato on the first bar, and then the pianist will just, like, maybe go, like, tenuto staccato, or even just back off dynamically a little bit, right? So that's why I really try to have people listen to what the pianist is doing, and I'm sure you did that. And I'm not putting down your score or anything, or your abilities here, Timothy. I think you did a great job. So thank you so much for participating in this challenge. I'm saying this year's challenge. It is still a year since I started the evaluation phase, and hopefully, I would like to get all of these evaluations done by within a year of starting the last one. And I just hate to say this, everybody, but this will have to be our first year in which I don't have a new orchestration challenge. I just really feel that it would have been easy for me who is well to be able to get through all of this stuff pretty easily by last year, September, October. That was my plan until I started getting really sick in September. So, so anyways, but like I said at the beginning of this video, I'm managing it, and if I can just manage to stop talking about this, then we can take a look at the next score. So thanks so much, Timothy. Here you have horns in F, and I think that, like, maybe if you had them in, like, say, C or in G, then I think you'd get a much better, probably C. You probably would get a lot more available pitches. Like, for instance, like this A, I believe, would be like a stopped or half stopped note, and these, like, this would not be a perfectly clear kind of support in a classical sense, right? So, but let's not worry about that too much. But just know that there are other selections of pitches for your horns that you could have chosen here. Just to kind of clear up any confusion, people might be looking at trompa and thinking that means trumpet, but it doesn't. It means horn in Spanish. So. So just to kind of play by the rules, as I'm trying to continue to do, we have to think about, like, am I using the same criteria for everybody? And here, the question is, does the intro set the mood effectively? And I would say it does very wonderfully. It has... I really like the use of strings here and the doublings with the winds, and it just has a wonderfully clear, clean color. And then here, you've got this this horn right in here, kind of playing this. So just once again, if this were like a horn in G, you could get that root tone. If it were If it were horn and C, you could be playing the fifth. Like if it were a C basso, you could be getting the you could just be picking up the sounding G3 on the third partial and so on. So I mean, there are a few options you could have taken here. Maybe horns and C basso would be the best option. Or maybe like you'd have one horn in C basso and one horn in G above it. Like that might work out the best to get a lot of these pitches. So anyway, to get back to this, the one problem that you've got here at the beginning, I like a lot of the phrasing that you've got and so on. But one of the problems you've got here at the beginning is that you don't tell us which player is playing, right? Like, if this were, this should be like numero uno, right? Oops. Sorry. Right? This should be first flute. Correct? Right? And for a little score like this, like if that's all you intended, you only need one flute, right? So if you have one flute, here's your first flute, and so on. Now keep in mind that like the flute is pretty much just like wasted until about maybe B or C here. It really won't contribute much, if anything, to the sound picture if it has to compete with the first violins and the clarinet, right? If it were to play out enough to really make a contribution here, then it would end up kind of phasing a little bit with the first clarinet. So it's better for you, I would say, to leave it as is, but just be aware that you really aren't, the flute isn't doing anything here except for just having the satisfaction of playing along with everybody else until it comes in here and it makes a stronger contribution. Now, for anybody who's watching this from previous from some of the previous evaluations that I did, notice the way that this is sort of a written out turn, right? And then this is, staying with the original timing that Beethoven had in 32nd notes rather than 16th notes, right? Da 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 da. Right? It just has a much tighter, more classical sound. So yeah, I mean you've got some, just straight doublings here, violas and first bassoon, clarinets and first and second violins. That's all working out pretty good. And I like the way that you don't take Beethoven literally. Like if he just has an eighth note here. A lot of people would just write eighth notes instead of the full quarter note, which is what the sound is in the piano, right? So I think that all works great. If there's one critique I would have is that I think that the slurring is a bit fiddly. Do you know what I mean? I mean, think about like what you're really asking the players to do here. Da 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 da. You see what I'm saying? So, wouldn't it be easier to just go da da, right? So this could all be done in one slur with all the players, and it would just sound much more natural, right? Ba da, and then da, like make this all one slur. Da da. Now here, like you're saying, slur this, don't slur that, right? So we start getting into uneven bowing patterns. What if we were to go down, up, down, slurring to the middle, right? Don't put the slur here, put the slur there. And then this becomes the up bow, and then down for everybody, and then up for everybody. Get rid of this slur. Don't need it, right? And then as far as the players are concerned of the woodwinds, you could just slap a big phrase over it, or you could have it match the articulation style of the violins if you really want to be a bit obsessive about it. I would say probably the best thing to do is just put a big slur over it. If that's more in the style, I would say. Or just like don't have any slurring over it and just let the players kind of work it all out for themselves. But But intro, setting the mood effectively, absolutely. I think it really sets the stage. It just feels like, okay, here's a work by Beethoven, right? That's what I felt like when I heard the first 4 bars. So now we get into the melody. So does the melody start with elegance? Absolutely. And I really love the fact that you didn't use oboe at all, right? You had this kind of cool sound of flutes and clarinets mixed with the strings, right? So that doesn't have the kind of the warmer sound of the oboe, though we had a little bit of warmth from the bassoon in the lowest voice. All right, so here we are. Da, 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 da. In Sibelius, you can actually make this into like an incomplete measure, right? Like here we've got add irregular bar, right? So we just make this into a single irregular bar, and then we make this into another irregular bar of a pickup and then you'd put the 4/4 time here, right? And then you don't get this clustering together. I mean, it works for me because this is just a sketch, and you're showing it to me, and it's an evaluation and so on. But like in terms of really using the application a little bit more intuitively and a little bit more completely in terms of engraving, that would be what to do, right? Just make this into an irregular bar, and that in the pickup bar right here into an irregular bar, 2 separate bars, and then put the common time, not 4/4. And then this doesn't even have like a time signature at the beginning. What happened, right? How do I know that this is 2/4 just by reading the durations of the notes? It's not good form, right? So make sure that you've got 2/4 here. Yeah, you know what I mean? Whether you go with A or B flat, it doesn't quite matter. I mean, I think you get slightly better intonation with with an A clarinet on this stuff, but for a good player, it doesn't matter. They'll be, they will be correcting any obvious faults and so on. Okay. So back to that melody starting with elegance. Second oboe is beautiful, but how do I know that this isn't oboe's adieu, right? You really need to say, like, I would say 1, right? Oops. Keep forgetting to ask for the right. So this should be first oboe, right? Okay, so first oboe plays this beautiful solo. Now, why doesn't the oboe player get any crescendo here, right? There's a crescendo in the piano score, right? Why can't we go da 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 da? All right, there's an emotional arc here. Right? Now you're doubling this with the strings, but I think all you need is a single oboe, right? You'll get more expression out of it, and you get a nice blended sound, right? It's kind of strange though. Like if we have the strength of the oboe mixed with the violins here, why don't we have that in the second violins? Couldn't you maybe have supplied some, maybe like a like clarinet or something like that could have come in and just sort of very discreetly played this. Also, like this is the beginning of a new phrase and a new section, so everybody should get a new dynamic, right? So what does it say in the score, in the piano score? Piano dolce, right? So piano dolce for all of the melodic parts, and then just piano for all of the other parts. It doesn't matter that it was marked before. This is a new section, a new part. When the conductor says, all right, let's go back to the time change, or let's go back to the pickup to common time, everybody will jump back to there. You have not given them a dynamic. You're not being polite to your players. Even here, thinking here that like these are players coming in after a few bars rest and so on in a new context, right? Don't they deserve to have some kind of warning? Now I really like this right in here. This the mixture of your horns and your violas, right? I think that's really lovely. And then this sort of all this stuff right here is just a kind of a kind of a mix down of what's in the left hand part. Just really lovely. I mean, I like the pacing though that's in the left hand where it's just going bonk 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 bonk, right? So I think that you could have put in a more paced part, with perhaps the G coming in on the pickup to the next bar, and then 3 Gs in a row, right? I think that's more true to the way the music, the energy of the music flows here. But, is there a kind of a natural a natural transition to octaves? I would say yes, except for I would really want this lower part to be doubled in the, with clarinet or whoever's around. Right? I do like this part down here, though, in the bassoons. I think that's really nice. And once again, this is just really, really great here with the violas and the horns. All right. So that's all good. I could say, yeah, there's a natural flow here. There's elegance here. There's a natural transition to octaves. You have ticked the boxes very, very nicely here, Miguel. Now we're getting to this. Now, once again, I feel that this is your enemy. This sort of fussy slurs, da 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 da. I mean, it's playable, but it doesn't really have that. What does Beethoven say here? He says leggermente in the original score, and that should be marked under all of these parts, right? Leggermente, right? Anything that's doing the melody in this little 2-bar section. And if it is leggermente, doesn't that sort of mean a kind of a spry sort of lightness, a kind of nimbleness, right? And if that's so, then what is da 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 da? Is that is that nimble? Is that light? Is that fleet-footed? No, it's sort of almost tripping over its own feet. What if it were just all staccato, right? Separate notes. Da 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 dum. Now that's leggermente, right? Or you could just have the whole thing slurred. Da da da. I would say slur each beam group if you're going to. Da dum. Da 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 dum. This is interesting. It's like here you are giving us, like you don't tell us who's playing this. You're just assuming that we would know, since you don't have this kind of double voices thing, that this is just the first player. But that's not good enough, my friend. You have to mark this, right? Here, I'm going to remember this time. Right? You have to mark it as the first player, right? Or if you want to, you could do that with it, right? Primo, right? Okay. So, anyways, I feel like those slurs are just very clumsy, but I do like the whole idea of clarinets, or clarinet, I should say. Just make it one clarinet. And then, I don't think you really need 2 bassoons here. You get a fat sound. Bum. I almost feel like it's just better to have 1 clarinet and 1 bassoon here, right? Da 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 bum. Now this is really nicely handled right in here, right? You've got your emphatic color of line, da 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 da, and it's done with clarinet right in here. They can really handle some of those low notes here, and you've got a little bit of the harmonic support in here. It's pretty minimalist, right? Like here I'd say, like, with a G horn and maybe C basso horn, like you could get a lot of these pitches a lot better, right? But anyways, so yeah, if we're talking natural horns with with just a standard modern horn, there's no problem at all. Okay, so here we're pushing into this sound picture, and the only comment I would have is that, like, you come in here with this rich texture here, of the way that this is scored, even though it's scored softly. There is no harmonic density in the strings setting up the presence of the strings here, right? So you just have, all you've got here is horns and bassoons pushing, and that's melody, pushing into, suddenly we've got lower winds and horns and the strings all together, right? And this is also sort of problematic. You're going crescendo to piano, right? I would say it would be nice if you gave it, like, if we're assuming, this is another problem that you've got, like, not only did you not mark dynamics here, you didn't mark dynamics in this new passage, right? And then here, nobody's got any context of how loud they're supposed to be starting this new idea. And then you get to here and you're going crescendo to piano. So what are they going to assume? Especially with 2 of these in a row, they're going to assume that they're starting at pianissimo. And none of that is marked here. There's no information, right? You're not doing very nice things for your players. So here I would say maybe starting mezzo piano or even mezzo forte, crescendo to maybe forte. I would say put the crescendo at the end of the bar, or the destination dynamic at the end of the bar, and then piano subito, right? Da 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 bum bum bum, right? Or you could go crescendo and then go a little diminuendo at the end, right? Da 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 bum bum, and that just sounds a lot more natural than the way you've got it scored now. It's very indeterminate what the dynamics are supposed to be. That this is like in the piano part, obviously piano subito, right? But in the like nobody knows what subito means for everybody else who's playing whatever dynamic they're playing. You have to mark subito for the orchestra, right? Now, if there's nothing happening before, obviously that's not a big problem. But here, when you have crescendo to pianissimo, that doesn't make any sense, right? So I would say start louder. Like, okay, so this is obviously should be piano dolce as Beethoven has marked, right? And then this right in here could be piano or mezzo piano, right? Then here I would say mezzo piano or mezzo forte, crescendo to forte at the end of these bars, and then piano, subito. Anybody who's got the crescendo. And I say anybody here because I feel that you could have been adding, like you could have been doubling some of these notes or even adding more harmonic context with some of these pitches here in your strings so that everybody comes together and it just really sounds very natural here. And like here you've got these contrasts of piano to pianissimo, piano, and so on. So you could have easily gone to a crescendo to forte, right? Da 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 bum bum bum, and then piano, dun dun, back to forte, dun dun dun, piano, dun dun, right? So there are a lot of possibilities here. I don't have big problems with the way that this was scored. I think that it's very satisfying and it's just a lovely way to finish. And I think you did a great job here, Miguel. And yeah, I mean, I was really hoping to have a 2024 orchestration challenge, but my health just does not allow for it. But I think that you would have done fantastically well with the selection that I had planned for this year. So that will just have to be next year, okay? And, wonderful job. And just like everybody else I've evaluated so far in this, I really want to see you in the next challenge, whenever that is. If my health improves significantly by, say, next March, we're thinking forward about 10 months from when I'm doing this, then I think that we can definitely have a 2025 orchestration challenge. But it's just, dizziness, a constant fever, brain fog, that's the worst of it, and, passing out whenever I sneeze, that kind of thing. Well, maybe not totally passing out, but feeling like I'm about to. So, anyways, not the funnest time for me, but in coming back to these evaluations, I feel like I'm having enormous fun. This is what I was meant to do. Like, what do I do best, right? Besides recreating myself when I compose my own music, is, recreating myself as a coach and mentor by looking at these pieces. And I'm just having so much fun. So thank you so much, Miguel. And I would really love to see you in the next one, whenever that is. So on to the next score. Thank you, Rex, for such an intriguing, reharmonized, almost dreamy and sort of I would say kind of pre-impressionist kind of a sound. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, like, whether some of that that dreaminess and some of that, that interesting harmony comes from, maybe like a more informed sense of harmony, or maybe you're just experimenting and kind of latched onto some pitches that just kind of sounded very cool when you had them kind of go a little bit out of place with Beethoven's harmony. So what I would say is, like, this score is, sort of has two different things fighting, one fighting against the other, right? So the first thing is, like, if you're going to sort of dabble around with, say, maybe kind of Liszt, late Brahms, Chabrier kind of ideas, then there's no need for you to have natural horns, right? What's the use of you having natural horns, right? Horns in G, you don't need them, right? So it's like totally not necessary. Also, just in terms of a few layout things, certainly the timpani and the horns could be two separate systems, right? They, like, rather than having everything connected by one bar line. There's a few little picky things in there. You probably could have had a slightly larger size staff size right here. But, I'm not going to quibble too much about all of that stuff. You took pains to make sure that, like, we knew which player was playing what, just by, giving us the, like, second voice rests and things like that. Which, it's nice, but it's not totally necessary. Like, so for instance, here you could have just said, like, flute number 1. Like, you just could have written the number 1 here, right? And then you wouldn't need the extra rest, which is a little messy looking, right? Honestly speaking. And then, here, I think you forgot to tell us who's playing this. Let's assume that's just first horn, right? This little mezzo staccato that you got in here. It just probably would work better. I mean, you're saying piano going up to a high G there and a G horn. Yeah, that's probably probably not the most likely outcome there. Okay, so yeah, it's probably gonna, those high pitches on a G horn are higher than you think, right? Because a high pitch on an F horn, right, like if this G were written for an F horn, it would be sounding C, right? But since this is a G horn, this is sounding D, and so on. So it's just like everything pushes higher and higher, right? So you just, be better for you just to, like, score this in, with just regular F horns and so on. Yeah, so let's talk about the general evaluation criteria. All right. So does the intro set up? Does it set the mood effectively? Okay, I mean, it does. Like this A sitting here in your oboe, it just kind of, this is one of those, like, little kind of pre-impressionist kind of touches, right? Just a slight, kind of a bit of disturbance in the force, right? Of the natural, very solid harmonization that Beethoven has worked out already. So, you're not so sure about that, right? And there are some other pitches that might be a little questionable too. But I would say, like, in general, like, this sets that up, right? You probably don't need this A, even with the kind of more dreamy approach that you've got right in here. Right. And of course, like, I might be saying dreamy this, dreamy that, pre-impressionist that, and you might be really horrified saying, oh, I didn't intend that. I wanted it to really sound like Beethoven. Okay, in that case, like, if you really wanted it to sound very, very much Beethoven, then you have to not introduce pitches that do things that are different from what his pitches are, right? It's like you can add harmonic weight by filling in the harmony, in with pitches that are consonant to the chords that he is writing. But if you write, like, things like this that sort of suspend across, some of these higher pitches here in the horn, and some of the way that you harmonize this, then obviously you're introducing new information in a way that Beethoven probably wouldn't find to be stylistically compatible, at the very least, right? Okay, so that is pretty much all I'm going to say about it, because I think otherwise I'm just going to waste a lot of time talking about it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your bowing before I go on. It's a little, I mean, it's somewhat haphazard, right? Um, you might have a better result here if this were just a quarter note with no slur, and then you slurred like the last two beats, because like here you have a really long down bow and then a quick up bow, right? You have this down, up, down. See, so like I think it's probably it's not to say that players don't run into that stuff and bow things like that all the time. It just like you get more even bows, right? Like because they compensate by being a little light. Like they'll be bowing quicker, but they'll just be a little bit lighter on their bow stroke, which creates a different sound, right? So it just to have the most even kind of a sound, I would say. You know, the more equal the bow strokes can be, the more even the sound will be, and you want that for this really beautiful cantabile, right? In a singing style, you want that to be singing. Here you wrote out the turn, which is fine. It's really strange that the way that you divided the slurs up here. Now this is going to be really fussy. You know, da ta ta ta. Da. You know, it's like it's kind of jerky, right? And then you have this da da da. Well, we're not going all. You know, even at 32, this is still kind of faster, right? Wouldn't it, you know? I like this, by the way, this slurring to this, but why couldn't we have like this be two D's in a row, right? Just because that pitch would be if there's two C sharps in a row in the original, right? So we're taking everything up a half step. So couldn't we just like slur up to an eighth note and then put the D in here, right? So then all the players are going down and then up, right? Now here, why couldn't you just tie this C here and then go da, or just have the full turn and everything under one bow? Get rid of this little slur, get rid of that little one. Just have one long slur over this, and then have like a slur here. I mean, I think let's see, down, up, down, up, down. See, like even your math doesn't work out here, right? For wanting to do this breath. So da, I think you wanted this sort of da da. If that is the case, then what you've got to do is you have to make all of these pitches here, all of these durations, including these long ones, they all have to end with a 16th note, and then I would put the pausa, the sort of breath mark, before that, so that the conductor can really lift and then place this little 16th upbeat going into the next bar, right? So, I mean, the players, like the way that you've written it is sort of shorthand, so that but like it's just to be on the safe side, I would turn this into like a dotted eighth note and then put the pausa before the 16th rest. Do you see what I'm saying? And then this could be like a double dotted quarter note or a quarter note tied to a dotted eighth with a 16th rest at the end with a pausa and so on, right? So that's just the easiest way. If you really want that da 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 da, and this should just be one. This should just be one long slur, da, rather than da da da. Do you see what I'm saying? I think it just works out a lot better. Okay, so with those caveats, some of the exploratory harmony that you're doing here is kind of fun. Actually, it has a very wonderful kind of nocturnal mood with candles floating on lily pads, in front of a in a beautiful garden with strange decking and strange plants and a wonderful twilight settling over the land, right? It has that kind of feeling. So it has a really nice mood building there. Okay, so now we're getting into melody starting with elegance, right? Natural transition to octaves, going on, expanding without clogging up, and so on. All right, well, okay, so let's stay with bowing. Okay, this is just really awkward the way that you've got it slurred. Let's assume this is up bow starting, right? So it's going up, down, up, down, up. Yeah, it just is weird. Do you know what I mean? It's just like and you're working against it with the phrasing of the clarinets, right? So it's like that everything's sort of chopping and changing, right? So I would say this is not a natural transition to octaves. Then, in the way that things, in fact, you don't really put in an octave accompanying, right? You've got all these other things that could be supporting this octave the way that it happens in the piano part, but you choose not to, and it would be so simple to do it, right? Like right here on this A, just have your first violins play divisi octaves, and then you don't have to change a single thing, right? You might want to support some of those octaves with some pitches that maybe shouldn't be, like if you really want the Beethoven style, not to beat that dead horse, but if you really want the Beethoven style, then you would possibly want, like just get rid of some of these pitches that are not in Beethoven's harmony and just have them double the octave as I've suggested it here, right? Then you get your natural transition to octaves. But what I think is much more concerning here is the phrasing, right? So or the slurs, the way the slurs are written to you pretty much, if you want nice even bowing, you kind of want a nice down bow at the beginning of each bar and so on. So what if this were like up? So you slur from there to there. Don't write in the up bow symbol. That's for the players to do, right? But just assuming this will be an up bow, if we slur from here to there, then you get a nice down bow, right? Like this flute player is tonguing the downbeat, right? Ta. Same thing here, ta. And then the bow is starting ta on your violins and violas, right? And then we've got this nice down bow here. So why is this slurring into it? Like, where's the down bow for them? Shouldn't they have a down bow too? What if you went like this? So slur for your up bow, right? And then slur here. Down, up, down, right? Up, down, up, right? It just fits perfectly well. Right? Now, as to these, I would probably break these down too. Rather than having this be like one long bow of going da, it's better to go da, 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 right? Da, da. Right? So it's just better to just break these slurs in half, right? Just have them be half as long. It's just easier. And you could even make this into a portato, right? Just put a slur across this, and then two tenuto marks, right? And then you get this so down, up, right? And that has a nice light accompaniment below this. Okay. So I'm not going to go into a big critique of what's going on here in the winds, except to say that like you could have nice, much longer slurs here in your first clarinet, and this slur here is nice. I don't know if you need a flutes here to support what's going on here. I would rather that you had, maybe your first flute could be doing some of your strange harmony stuff, right? Like you could have your second flute. You have your second flute take this part here, right? Because you've already have a B here, right? So actually, it could be going G and then slur up to the C and then the D, right? And then the first flute coming over the top, and then you have your first oboe or second oboe if you want the first oboe to do this part. Your oboe could be playing along with the lower divisi first violins if you decide to change this into octaves, right? Right. So anyhow, yeah. So and then just like some of the alternate pitches in here, I'm not going to talk about too much, except for like obviously in terms of like balance and proportion. You would, if that really is your intention, you need to work a little bit on the way that they work with the phrasing, right? And there are a couple of pitches I would correct, but I'm not going to get into that. I just really want to stick to the evaluation criteria, like how that fits what you've done here and so on. So I would say with those changes, then you would pretty much achieve a natural flow. You'd have a nice, elegant melody with a correct kind of bowing, and you'd have a natural transition to octaves if you put in the octaves, and you supported them with maybe maybe change some of these pitches so you've got an extra wind instrument to support it, and you could even start all the way back here with flutes supporting the first violins. Okay. So now we're getting into the next part. So does the orchestration contrast with the theme, right? So here we have our main theme. Then we have our little episode, right? And here you say leggermente, but then you slur it, right? So it's I mean, sort of, you could kind of say that is that, it's light and frisky and so on, dexterous. But I mean, with the slur, it's kind of like it would almost be better that this weren't slurred, right? That it was just da 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 dum, right? And then that would, if you took away the slurs, then you have more of a contrast with all this very smooth stuff that happened before, right? And the same thing with your winds, ba-ba-ba-ba-bum, right? Yeah. And then I like the pizzicato in here, the little supporting pitches. That's kind of cool. Yeah, so you saw the need to add harmonic support, and you added it, right? And you've got some stuff going on here with your horns and so on. Okay. All right. So now, here's the problem, okay? And that is these lower pitches here on your winds, even though this is very, very spare and stripped back, the lower pitches here in the flutes, on the second flute part especially, when stacked up against what's happening in the second oboe, it's really just like does not have any power. I mean, it would be almost better for you to have, like, if you just really want this lower pitch here to be doubled by, for just a little bit more strength, it would be better that a clarinet did it rather than the second flute did it, right? If you just really want a little bit more power and incisiveness there, then you'll get it much, much better. I'm not so convinced by having the second pitch above the first pitch. I'm not so convinced by this D right in here, right? I mean, it's a neat idea to have the reaction be above rather than below. Okay, that's all cool, but I mean, I think that this is going a little far to have these D's in here, because it distracts the player's ear, especially with this being even mezzo staccato, right? What it does is the note will be about this long. It'll sort of cut off right around maybe this G, right? So it's going to smear into, like the B is going to be, you really won't hear the clarity of the line going across because of this D being on top, smearing into this D here, making the B below it seem inconsequential. So, what are you left with? Just a couple of, you're left with a couple of clean 16th notes above, right? So, I mean, I think this could be done a little bit better. I like the idea. Just try to make it work better, right? The D is not making it work, right? And then the same thing, right? If this really is horn in G, like you have a similar problem there, right? With such a high pitch, right? Okay. All right, so now, going on to the next part. Do you have an emphatic color of line? Yes, I mean, really nice. You just start just beautifully at the beginning here. nice and strong here with the flutes and the oboes, right? And you've got, and you're doubling these guys up instead of changing them to octaves and whatever. Okay, so that's just your choice. And then here you have a nice, you set up the harmonic density going into this bar really, really well. Okay. Just overall, like the dynamics are they're a little scattershot. I mean, they're nice at the beginning. I like the idea of keeping the winds back here. That's nice, so that the strings can be out forward, and this is sort of like a luminous background. I like everybody starting off piano here. Now, here you've got like new dynamic markings here. I almost feel like the strings could be a little stronger here, like going up to mezzo piano, right? And then have a piano like almost like an echo. Da 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 bum, right? So I think that this could come up maybe a little bit to mezzo piano. And then here, this is kind of strange. You really don't need to say mezzo forte in the middle. I think you could just go like, how strong do you want it to end up? Forte in the middle here? And then just have the crescendo to forte. And I think that you'll get what you want. I think it'll be mezzo forte by the time you get to here. But I mean, yeah, you could leave it in just to be specific about it, but it just, I think you'll get what you need. Like, the players will be listening to each other. Okay, what I'm not so cool about is, like, you've got this little contrary motion stuff happening in here, okay? And it really doesn't do a whole lot for the consistency of the line, because you have almost, like, just aside from the fact that you have a unison here for the strings, you don't have any, you sort of cut off your doubling from your winds, right? And it's almost as if you're doing too much of a good thing, right? You're adding so much harmonic density setting up, even from above, and you're adding like more ideas here with these counter melodies, that like we don't end up having very much consistency of line here, right? I mean, I would have preferred if, I think this would work a little bit better if you had a spare clarinet, maybe, or somebody, a spare clarinet, a spare oboe, to be doubling the winds here, just to kind of keep the consistency together, so that these little flurries that you've got here don't. Because like the way you've got them scored, they sort of take over, and we don't really hear like the meaning of this pushing forward to this area here. And what's happening here when you get to the end? What's that dynamics? Is it supposed to be just sort of mezzo forte with a crescendo in the middle here, and then you end up mezzo forte there? It's just a little unclear. I mean, I feel like I feel like Beethoven wants you to go da 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 bum bum bum. He's not telling you to go da 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 dun dun dun. Doesn't that just sort of make this sort of feel unimportant? Like, where are we headed to? Oh, we just sort of, it's kind of loud. I feel that Beethoven wants you to be loud, damn it, right? And then if you're going to go soft, 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 he wants you to come back to loud. Bum, bum. Right? So I think maybe rethink the dynamics here so everybody can crescendo forwards, and you just get a nice, strong, emphatic line here. Which leads us, once again, to, like, bowing and slurring, right? Do you really want this to be separate bowings here? Dun, 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 and then slur. What if this were not slurred, this were slurred, and this were not slurred? Ta 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 ta. Slur, slur, slur. Down, up, down. Right? Don't you think that maybe is a little bit better way of organizing it dramatically? So, anyways, it's something to think about. And just in general, like, there's a lot of inconsistency about where are you slurring to and why are you slurring in a certain way. Like, for instance, here you have a slur over your first clarinets, but not in your second oboe, right? It was just sort of playing the same thing. So, I don't quite get that. So this is the same, and then here you kind of have these yeah, this parallel motion here. So yeah, so this just, yeah, this is really, this is low and it's walking all over the violins, right? So this in particular, I would say, is just really interfering. Did you maybe get this mixed up and think that you were doubling the oboe here, and then you ended up scoring it down a third instead of up a third? I think that that might be the problem here, right? Okay, all right. Anyway, you know, all those problems aside, let's stay focused on the question of slurring. So, do you really want to go da and not da ta? Right? Da ta. What's wrong with going da ta? Why does everything have to smear so much? Right? And if you're going to take my advice and go, okay, well, I'm going to cut. I think Thomas is right. I'm going to cut these slurs in this leggermente to make it actually leggermente. Maybe bring it up to mezzo piano, right? And all of these pitches, and leave this piano. It's really nice. Yeah, and you could also take you could take the slurs away from the 16th note stuff. Yeah, because it's really hard to go dial on a, like crossing the registers, slurring up, and then slurring way back down again. I mean, it's possible. It's just really hella awkward, to borrow a word from my brother who went to Berkeley High School. So here, slur, I would say, okay, you're going to take my advice, and then you're going to slur this, and then have these as separately articulated, right? Okay. So, slur, I would say, so this would just make this one slur, and then make it another slur, and make that another slur, and then just have these as separate bowing. Now here, of course, you're taking away the bum, 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 right? Whole idea. And this is probably where it is the most anti-Beethoven, right? Is this low stuff going on in here? And once again, I'm not gonna even bother going over it. That's a separate thing. That would be like a lesson in, kind of more of a lesson in arranging than a lesson in orchestration, right? So I'm just going to let it be imperfect, and you can just sort of figure out why it's emphatic, why it isn't, why you prefer it, and why you don't. It's totally up to you, okay? But I would just say, like, if you want this part to have more energy, then I would say restore Beethoven's bass lines and just have everybody going, down, up, down, and the strings, right? And then pump, pump, pump in your bassoons rather than ba, right? Okay, so yeah, and I love this little staccato stuff in here. This is so cool, the way that this was scored. Very nice and straightforward. And then this is really, very post-romantic. Okay, so yeah, and there's probably some, the way you have the interlocked E and F here in between the oboes is definitely something that will, it's better for you to stack these pitches, right? To have the E and the F be above, the C's here. So E and the F here in the first oboe, and then the C's in the second oboe, and then this G and A above. So like, don't interlock your oboes and flutes, unless they're pretty high, right? And then it's just like a lot of special circumstances. It's better just to stack them, okay? Like, what does Ravel do? He stacks them. All right. And you see, this is kind of nice in here. This could just be a, if you're going to slur like this, then you could just make this into a whole note above and then slurred notes below, right? Same thing with these C's here. If you just really want it to be as smooth as paste, right? Anyway, okay, well, that's probably all I could say about this Rex. I mean, it's a really cool, very original take on it, and just all of your little mutations of the harmony and everything else. I'm sort of critiquing the hell out of them, but it doesn't mean I don't appreciate your spirit of experimentation. So I mean, I think it's a really cool entry. Yeah, so I would just say, like, find out more about the way certain harmony works and certain kinds of things like that, and I think you'd be able to add those approaches to works like this with a lot more power and confidence. All right. Okay, so yeah, what a great entry. So now let's go on to our sixth and final entry for this compilation. And now we have our last score, our 6th out of 6th. And just an observation here for people who are listening to that last mock-up. Actually, this is better than it sounds. Okay, the part of what's going on here, Christoph. You might be comparing your own mock-up to other people's examples and wondering, oh well, why? A part of it is because your particular sound set or sound system or whatever is not has no reverb, right? And so that's one problem. And another is like the sounds themselves are they're a little lower grade. You might want to look into, say, Note Performer. That's a pretty cheap option. I think it's about €100 or something like that. It's sort of based on samples and synth kind of sound production, tone production, but it's a fairly it's got, like, in terms of balance and tone color and stuff like that, it's fairly good for judging what it would sound like live. But it's no substitution for a live orchestra, or B, like a really carefully constructed DAW mock-up with just where tons and tons of time have been put into making things sound exactly right. Okay, so that's part of the conundrum. So now let's take a look at just once again playing by the rules. Let's compare the score that you turned in to my evaluation criteria. Okay, so the first thing is, does the intro set the mood effectively? I would say that it does, because it's kind of like this nice little aubade, right? It's like a little morning song or little, morning prelude, right? Kind of like this. You could imagine the sun rising, the roosters crowing, that kind of thing. So, having said that, everything is just really way out of balance in terms of like the way that the natural dynamic curves were, and the levels and so on and so forth. Maybe you've done a little bit of mixing on this yourself. I don't know, but yeah, you really don't need to switch around some of these values. Like, for instance, like, you don't really need pianissimo on your F octaves compared to your clarinets and horns and so on. Everything should just be piano. Another thing you don't need is this. Do not even bother. All right, this whole 8 below the bass clef on things like contrabassoon, double bass, and so on. Like, forget it. Don't bother with that. Like, the standard notation is just a simple old bass clef. All this other 8 stuff is just, it's a fancy recent times idea of telling it's almost like putting training wheels on a Maserati. You know what I'm saying? Like, the bass players know what their clef is. They don't need the little 8. They know that they transpose down an octave. And the same thing is true for contrabassoon players and so on. So here we've got clarinets in B flat, the pieces in F. We got our valve horns in F, right? So you're saying right off the bat that you are, this is, you're using modern instruments, right? So valve horns, valve trumpets. And I think that's a pretty good approach to take here. All right. So here you're starting off. I think these slurs work pretty nicely. I like the slur over the turn and so on, and I think that all works great. It would be a different It's a different situation with strings, and we'll talk about how you could be slurring your strings a little bit better. But here I think this all works great, and it's all like all of the slurring is parallel except for right here when you're, and that's fine. You might as well, I would say, you might as well just slur from here to here and then just have the horns play together rather than slurring across the downbeat there. And, I like the range here. You've got the, starting in the upper chalumeau, ending up in the lower clarino. It's a beautiful place for the clarinet to be. It's a weaker register, but you are playing softly and you're playing against horns. So I think the warmth of the horn kind of covers up a little bit of the dullness of the throat tones, if that is ever even a concern, right? And the horns are placed in a really nice register. This is like they've got as much control as they'd ever possibly need in order to accompany the clarinet without blasting it out of the water. Something that it really sounded to me like you had, like you had mixed down your horns here, and then you sort of left that mixing low, and then we kind of sort of barely hear horns afterwards. I would say try not to do that. Just try to mark everybody piano, and then adjust the registers to the to like the natural dynamic level in the texture. Right? It's better to do that than to fool around too much with dynamic mixing. Right? Although there are definitely exceptions. Now here at the allegro, and especially with the repeat, I would definitely put in a dynamic marking. Okay, just like, because everybody go back to the repeat. How loud are the horns supposed to be again, right? If they have a page turn, they don't know. So just, make sure that that's marked, all right? And then here you left out, like, what dynamic are the violins? Are the cellos still pianissimo? What's going on here? Not attending to situation or to details like that can make your score like that, and your mock-up, like, you'll end up like not being able to hear this at all. In fact, I could really not really hear the cellos, right, doing their little offbeats here, and that's a shame, right, because that's more information for the listener of your mock-up that is not coming through. So I think we established, we talked everything that we could about the beginning here. So let's focus on this next section here. All right, where our criteria are melody starting with elegance, natural transition to octaves, ? And, is there a natural flow in the accompaniment? Do you expand without clogging up? So I would say here, it's kind of interesting, this little contrary motion that you've got going on in here. Violas and bassoons and so on against the the curve, the arc of the melody. It gets a little cloggy in here, but you have so much weight on the melody, right, with these octaves in the first and seconds, and the not to mention like the oboes and the flutes and so on, that I almost feel like there could have been more of this offbeat kind of feel. Like there could have been an instrument that you could have sacrificed or rearranged so that we would get that same, bump, 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 bump against the beat kind of pulse. But I still like it a lot, and it does solve a lot of problems. So now, as to the bowing, right? I promised I would cover that. The problem is that you really have just left phrasings here, phrasing marks, And that's okay for a piano work, but it's not good enough for a work where you have to think about the string players bowing, right? So in this situation, for instance, I would just I mean, this makes kind of no sense, having a slur into a slur, right? So I would have the slur end here, right? So that's an up bow. Okay, and I mean, you could fit all of this under one bow, and you could fit all of that under another bow, but like, wouldn't it be more natural to just like slur this, and then don't have a slur on this, don't have a slur on that? So it's going up, down, up, down, up, and then maybe just this could all be covered under one down bow, and this could be all covered under one up bow, right? And then you just get a really smooth sound throughout. And then just adjust the slurring of the other parts to match that, so that the bows are generally going the same direction as much as possible. For this, I would say, like, you could have, like, you could score this to be like, just leave it alone, and so the players will just go, down, up, down, or down, up, down, up, down, up. Or they might actually decide, like the concertmaster might just say, okay, well, this should all be portato, right? So just like, maybe this could be covered by one slur, and then just have tenuto marks on each one, and then a tenuto mark here, there, and there, and another slur. So they just be going, up, 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 down, 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 right? And then here, just slur across, and then that all works. So I mean, I would say that's probably more than you really even need to do. As to these other parts in here, these wind parts, you can have nice long slurs. I don't think that is a big problem. And I think maybe start a new slur here rather than slurring off of this whole note. I think you could just play that and then come in here, right, with a new tonguing right in there, just to so like, I mean, because otherwise, like, who's got the downbeat here? Just the maybe the clarinets, and then if you decide to do that, then the double basses and the horns. All right. So I already talked a little bit about how when you go to octaves here with your second violins, we're kind of missing we're missing more of that pulse, right? Just it's all down to cellos, and nobody else is helping at all, right? So with the way you've mixed, or that you've basically indicated a pianissimo here, and the cellos are still playing pianissimo in the mock-up, just like it's shapeless, right? And that's why people are listening to it and saying, oh, I guess there isn't much of a pulse here. Well, I mean, there is. This could have another instrument helping it out, right? Like maybe like second bassoon, or maybe this could be second bassoon, and the first bassoon could be going dun 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 dun, right? Okay. But I mean, this is a big problem here. Pizzicato, whole notes at allegro ma non troppo. Okay, if this were prestissimo, then I would say pizzicato and whole notes is fine, right? But you could put in like maybe half notes, right? And just say sostenuto. So just say pizzicato. I would say put the pizzicato up here. That's where the technique text goes, right? And then I would say P SOS period sostenuto, in other words, right? And then just have this as a half note, have that as a half note, and so on. It's just being realistic, right? I mean, if you already have your horns an octave above, just kind of doubling that pitch, like you don't have to worry so much about like excessively trying to really, really get this to last an entire bar's length, right? It's because it's not going to happen. And then here, I would just mark this as a half note at the most, right? Here's the thing that you may not have thought of, Christoph, and that is notes that pluck at a deep pitch or punch at a deep pitch, right? Like, say, timpani, right? They actually use the concert hall as their sound chamber much more so than the body of the instrument, right? The body of the instrument is important, but like you might wonder, well, why do they always mark timpani, or most scores mark timpani strokes as just like a quarter note? Well, it's because the hall is doing the reverb, right? And same thing with a bass drum stroke. Like a percussionist will be they'll hit the note and then they'll just cut off the head because the sound of the head vibrating is just a sort of a distraction. The whole hall is going boom, right? So you don't need these long durations after a pizzicato. Even at a soft dynamic, if everybody else is balanced, the pluck is going to have a presence in the hall. Okay, all right. So I like these written low C's sounding low F's, and they're kind of fighting against. I mean, like here you've got them; they're doubling the double basses here, right? And it's just like the way that this is all placed together, it really is once again kind of swallowing the syncopation here in the cello. So it's all the more reason, you've got another bassoon that's not being used, or you got an oboe who could be maybe playing those Fs an octave higher or something, that you could really get a lot more out of that, right? Okay. So those are my observations on this. So now let's get to the okay, here you say non-legato. All right. You don't even need to say that. Same thing, leggermente is enough, right? And leggermente here, you put it up here in the technique text area. What you should do is you should put it down here, and you should tell us what dynamic this is. Maybe you go up to mezzo piano, right? Because it's like a more active, more like after this big sweep here, you've got the crescendo, and you're coming off of it, right? So I would say maybe go up a dynamic, like maybe to mezzo piano, even mezzo forte, right? So if you say mezzo forte or mezzo piano leggermente, you don't need the non-legato. We know it's not legato, right? Right? If you just put in the leggermente, that's enough, right? Beethoven has already told everybody what they need to know. I like this little supporting harmony right in here. That's nice. That was one of the questions I asked. So, is there a contrast with the theme? There's a contrast with the theme only in the sense that you have it so heavily, you have the theme so heavily doubled here in winds and strings and so on, and suddenly you just have one string player playing, right? So that in that sense, it's a contrast, right? But it is not a contrast in the sense that the first violins have been expressing the main theme, and now, hey, they're still expressing the theme, right? So if you wanted a really, really stark contrast here, you might want to go to, say, oboe or maybe flute an octave higher or something, all right? Or bassoon an octave lower. All right, but anyways, so I would say it contrasts in terms of tone weight, but it doesn't really contrast in terms of timbral character that much. All right, but yeah, just mark it mezzo piano or mezzo forte leggermente. You don't need the non-legato. So and then this nice little cushion here, and then little violas I don't know why you didn't do what Beethoven did here, bum 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 bum, in cellos, right? I mean, why does it have to be I mean, it's maybe this is more symphonic to you or something. I don't know, but I think we're missing an opportunity here just to use Beethoven's, perfectly fine original score. And yeah, and here you do it again. And this is kind of nice, clarinets and bassoons. And that was the same thing as before, clarinets and bassoons, low winds. I would say, yeah, all the more reason, this should be piano. This should be mezzo piano in both first violins and violas, right? And that way, the sound, this very sonorous register of these clarinets and bassoons don't take over, they don't drown out what's going on here. Right. So try not to use a dotted rest, a dotted half rest in a situation like this. It should be a half rest and then a quarter rest, rather than this kind of thing. So here you do it again. Yeah. So try not to do that. Okay. So our next concern is emphatic color of line. Right. So here, once again, you're really playing it safe. Right. You're just saying, okay, I'm just having the violins in here. Okay. Now this. Okay. All right, so we've got some problems here. All right, sorry to say, Christoph. So crescendo P. So did you mean like? I know that that's what it says in the Beethoven score, but he's not saying that you should start at piano and crescendo to piano. What he's saying is he wants us to get nice and warm in here, and then he wants you to suddenly go like piano subito, right? So that's his idea. So if you're going to follow his lead and you want that effect, then you need to have a sort of a destination dynamic at the end and then say piano subito, all right? So you could go crescendo to say, let's say that you get to maybe like by this fourth beat, you just get to mezzo forte, right? So let's imagine that you do that, right? So you're going to get to mezzo forte. So I would just mark, like, don't even bother with a crescendo here. Just put mezzo forte here, mezzo forte all the way across wherever you got something going on. So crescendo to that, right? Maybe this could be just a crescendo from mezzo piano to mezzo forte. I try to discourage crescendoing back and forth between mezzo dynamics, but here it's fine because it's a building, right? It's building as part of a greater thing. And then here, subito piano, right? Some people would mark that as SP, right? Which I think, you never know what different players of different cultures will think SP means. So I would say just go P, then followed by SUB period. Piano subito. All right, so everybody will understand. And you have the space to write that in. It's all good. So if that is fine, and then maybe you're thinking to yourself, no, I thought that this whole passage should go crescendo to like I wanted it to end up being piano, but I wanted to crescendo up to the piano. In that case, this has to start off pianissimo, right? And if you're thinking, no, I wanted to start here and I wanted to crescendo forwards and then end up, maybe it's better to end up louder, right? Then I would say, okay, that's fine. Then you just replace piano with forte or mezzo forte, right? So just crescendo forwards. All right. Now, our next problem here is bowing, right? You just have a big old slur mark over this dropped in there from the piano. Okay. So if you want this to be nice and smooth all the way through, then probably better to have a slur across this and a slur here. You don't want to slur into the downbeat, right? You have other instruments starting on the downbeat, so everybody should be bowing on the downbeat, rather than one instrument sliding and the other one's playing or whatever. Just go da ta, right? Up, down. All right, so just slur this far. All right, and then right on the downbeat, okay? Everything is good from that point. And then here, like, this is really shapeless. This should just slur right here, right? Slur every every two beats. So slur this, slur that. So this gives you the down bow. There's the up bow. And then, do you really want this to go da rather than dun 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 ba da da dun dun dun? Right? See, it's so much more emphatic. And here you're doing the horn sixths to thirds, bum 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 thing. It's really beautiful. And then here you go fifths to thirds and thirds, right? So I think if you're going to have this bum 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 kind of energy in your bassoons and your horns, then you should definitely have your strings also just playing separate single notes. Bum bum bum. However, if you want everything to be smooth, then just have everybody with a slur on them. Even here, you could have this as portato. You could have tenuto marks with a slur over them, right? So that, you just get that kind of easier sort of a thing. But I think that, maybe it's better to slur here, slur there, and then go ta, ta, ta with your, with the articulation, the winds matching down, up, down with the violins. Now I'm saying down bow and up bow and so on, but that doesn't mean that I want you to mark the up bow and the down bow marks, right? So don't do that. That is for the players to do, right? I keep repeating that throughout this video, but I think it's really important because I'll say it a million times and then I'll still get an orchestration challenge entry from somebody I said that to in the last year, and they'll and they'll have bowing marks on it, right? So you don't need those. That's the player's domain. It's kind of strange that you've got intervals here in single, like in first voice intervals, and then here you've got first and second voice intervals. I don't know. Maybe it just was. Yeah, you don't really need that, but you're not really telling us. Let me go back here. Yeah. So this is the first bassoon. So you're kind of sticking with him all the way through, right? Okay. All right. So I mean, I kind of like this sort of like bassoons and horns plus strings, and then alternating with like all reeds. And then I love the way you finish this up, right? You kind of dovetail into the, once again, horns and strings. And I think that like you could have like the second bassoon go C C C down here, right? To kind of like double the violas from an octave below. And that way you've got the same kind of texture here, right? Of bassoons and horns working together throughout this whole thing. Yeah, so this is nice. And then you take it further, and like this is as far as we go, as far as this train goes. But still, a really cool entry. And for everybody who has made it all the way through, just thank you so much to all of my participants today. Thank you, Christoph and Danielle and Rex and everybody else. And you probably don't need me to say, hey, I'm sorry that I haven't gotten to this yet. I mean, I think everybody knows that I would rather have finished all this stuff, September, October, November of last year, before my health got to be too much for me. But I'm slowly figuring out a good pace for myself where I can continue to get these finished. I can continue to do the professional work that I have on my slate this year. I've cut some of that back, but I am still doing some significant work this year, and I'm continuing to run the channel and to check in on the group and everything else and supply content there. So, but it's just like I'm not going to be able to do it as furiously for the foreseeable future, right? So, like I'm saying, I'm probably not going to have an orchestration challenge, another one, until possibly next year, and I just have to see how my health goes, right? Because it's a lot to. I don't want to keep people waiting on it, and so on and so forth. So yeah. So this is, but I mean, it was almost like a double dose, wasn't it? Like I gave the option for 2 movements, and we got like 187 scores, and it's like double the amount of scores that I got when I first started, more than double. So there's plenty of this content to be coming along. And, hopefully people won't just get totally sick of Beethoven by the time we get to the end of it. But I have some ideas about how to keep things interesting as we go along. So, once again, just, I'm feeling once again that like coming back to this is very healing for me. And just so long as I can pace myself, I think that it's going to all turn out really well. So thanks everybody for your patience. Thanks so much for your understanding. Thank you so much to my supporters on Patreon for sticking with me and giving me so much encouragement. And it's all hugely appreciated. All right. So I hope to be releasing, speaking of Patreon, I hope to be releasing most of the next category of Patreon submissions throughout the rest of this month. And possibly having another one of these compilations too, maybe coming along by the end of the month, the beginning of next month. All right. And hopefully, after an entire year has gone by, perhaps I will have completed the run of evaluations. So anyway, thanks everybody, and I will see you very soon with more content.